Yeah, I want to dwell for a moment on this notion of racial resentment. I've often wondered what exactly we're measuring when we ask someone a question like, or when you say, "Do you agree that Black people should, work hard like every other group?" So something like that. And I came across this paper by Riley Carney and Ryan Enos, I think Harvard researchers, where you may have seen this, where they substituted a random Eastern European group like Lithuanians in these racial resentment scales and substituted them in for African Americans and found that they got basically the same responses from people of both parties. So people who would say Black people should work hard like everyone else were just as likely to say Lithuanians should work hard like everyone else. And what they surmise from this is that what alleged racial resentment scales are measuring is not properly shouldn't be seen as racial resentment, but rather some kind of deep instinct for procedural fairness and meritocracy. Have you come across that, or what do you think?
I haven't read that specific paper, but I do think I would push back against the claim. I do want to make clear, while I am sympathetic to a lot of these academic critiques that exist of racial resentment as a concept, I do want to make clear that I think that I don't want to. I feel bad saying this out loud, but I think racism clearly exists. I think some voters are more motivated by racially charged things than others, and I do think that racial resentment, even if it doesn't on an individual level capture everything, I think is related, in a lot of ways. Like to talk, but I think that the paper you just brought up does really highlight how a lot of this stuff works. I think that racial resentment is a lot less cartoonishly evil. It's more subtle and complicated than I think that a lot of liberals will give it credit for. And so one thing you could say in response to your paper is that without any context, it's totally true that a lot of conservatives will care a lot about procedural fairness for some random Lithuanian group, but there's a reason that conservatives and actually care a lot about procedural fairness relative to liberals, and I won't ascribe that entirely. But I think if you step back and you look at what areas of the country are high racial resentment and which areas are not, I don't think it's a coincidence that the white people with the highest levels of racial resentment live in the Deep South. If you map out racial resentment, I don't think it's surprising that it's areas where Trump did the most well, did the best in the primary, or that, on a geographic level, it's correlated with places where people make more, I think, clearly racist, search terms. And so, when they're Googling, racial slurs and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I do think that, this is a construct that's real. I do agree that it's more subtle than people give it credit for. But, I do think that racial resentment as a concept is important. I guess at a high level, I think it shouldn't be surprising in a lot of ways that if you have a situation where you have a candidate who campaigned on saying a bunch of racially inflammatory things early in his campaign, and then got a bunch of people who seemed to score highly on racial resentment questions to swing toward him, I think that racism has something to do with it, even if the word racist is hard to define and racism is hard to define. I don't want to get into a semantic fight, but I don't think it's true that all of these working class white people in northern Wisconsin trended against Democrats because they were inspired by Donald Trump's devotion to, fairness, procedural fairness. I don't think that's right.